Daniel chapter number 6. Make sure this is on, if you will. I think it is. If you can hear me okay. Daniel chapter number 6, and the title of today's message is Taming Lions. And as I mentioned to you, this story in chapter 6 of Daniel in the lion's den, is one of the best known and best loved stories in all the Bible. I mean, little children love it, and rightfully so. Sunday school teachers love to tell it, and rightfully so. It is a story that has encouraged God's people for thousands of years. And think about it, why shouldn't it? Why shouldn't this wonderful story encourage us? I mean, the story is filled with unexpected twists and turns. The good guy wins, spoiler alert, and the bad guys lose. The bad guys are torn into pieces. I guess that's losing, right? I mean, they lose for sure. And along the way, we learn the secret to what Daniel's success was. Somehow, he managed to survive, and I would like to use the word thrive, in a spiritually hostile environment. He is a perfect example of somebody who was very successful in the secular world, but never compromised in his morals. He never compromised in his integrity. He always kept God first. It did not affect his work life during the week, but he also did not let his work life affect his spiritual life. And we need to make sure some wonderful lessons we can learn from this. Is it possible, question I hear all the time, is it possible to live for God in this world anymore? How wicked this world is. Is it possible to live for God? Well, we see wholeheartedly from the life of Daniel and others, but we're talking about Daniel, it wholeheartedly is possible. It's possible to not just survive, but thrive in a spiritually hostile environment. And that's a great place for us to begin, because we do live in a spiritually hostile world where the temptation to compromise our faith is around every corner. Every single day we face these things. I mean, the world doesn't want their conscience pricked. They don't want to feel guilty. They don't want to reward those who dare stand up for what they believe in. Our world is full of compromisers. In some parts of the world, standing up for Christ means suffering and death. And I'm thankful that in America that's not the case yet. But I hope you understand, all across our world, and there are many websites that you can go to, because our national media does not cover it the way that they should. But there are people who are still, every single day across this world, dying for their faith in Christ. There are more people dying today in 2021 for their faith in Christ than at any given point in history. And you think, well, there's no way that's the case. I don't hear that stuff, Brother Adrian. Well, there's a reason we don't hear that, because most people don't seem to care, and they don't want to have anything to do with the things of Christ. But there are more people suffering today in 2021 for their faith and dying for their faith than ever before in history. And that's saying a lot when knowing the history of Christianity. And so in America, thankfully, and in most countries in the West, all believing in Christ means for us is maybe a little humiliation, maybe being ostracized from a particular group, or ridiculed, or scorned, or being left out, or maybe just being passed over. Sometimes it leads to tension in our home life. Maybe it leads to tension on the job. But the book of Daniel teaches us how to live for God in this hostile environment. His example shows us that it can be done, but, understand me, it will take some discomfort. It's not always going to be easy street as we'd like it to be when we live for Christ. We kind of wish it would be, right? I'm living for God. I'm doing my best, Brother Adrian. I know I believe what's right, and I know that it's hard. It is hard. We wish, how I wish in the flesh that once you trust in Christ that everything is easy street after that, and it's just, cupcakes and apple pie, and that's it. That's not the way that it works. It is possible to live for Christ in this hostile world, and this spiritually hostile environment that we live in every single day. But it's going to cause some discomfort. It's not going to be easy. If you don't compromise, the fact is you somewhere along the way are going to come into trouble sooner or later. It's just going to be the case. If you don't give in to what the world wants, you are going to face some type of persecution in some form or fashion. And here the story of Daniel in the lion's den, it reminds us that there is a spiritual battle raging all around us. We know the Bible tells us in 1 Peter chapter 5 that the devil is like that roaring lion, walking around, roaming around, seeking whom he may devour. He wants to destroy your life. He wants nothing more. And I think it's appropriate that we're here on Halloween. I know that Halloween has been made into a lot of things. I'm not a huge fan of Halloween. I'm not big on dressing up, even though this afternoon I'll be dressed like Pac-Man. Of course, you do a lot of things for the family. But I'm not big on Halloween. But one thing that I think that Halloween, and there's a lot of disservices that have been done, but one thing that's been done is we have the devil costumes and the things like that of the red pointy ears, the red ponytail, and the pitchfork, and the problem is that's what many people's opinion of the devil is, that he's some caricature, he's some fictitious cartoon, and that's all the devil is. The old cartoons with the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other, whispering in your ear, telling you not to do that, and that's our picture of the devil, and it's cute. We think, oh, what harm could somebody like that do? But the bottom line is the devil is very real, and he wants nothing more. And I love the fact that the Bible portrays him as that roaring lion. He wants nothing more than to destroy your life. He wants to destroy you. It's not cute, is it? That's not something that very gives you the warm fuzzies inside. If you understand that there is somebody out there that wants to absolutely ruin your life and ruin your testimony and destroy you, that's a wake-up call. It should be for us all. If you knew there was a lion on the loose in Fayette, you wouldn't go out until that thing was caught, right? Heaven forbid if that thing was hiding in your bushes or around your house, who would chance it, right? Well, we have that spiritually all the time around us, and we have to be very careful. Therefore, it shouldn't surprise us if the devil has an army of supporters that are there, that their major call in life is to harass us and to trick us and to trip us up if they can. Now, you can tell a lot about the quality of a person by the quality of his enemies. And I love the fact that Daniel had the right type of enemies. The people that hated Daniel were all the people that you hope hate you when you're living for God, right? These weren't the righteous people that were hating him. These were people who wanted nothing to do with the things of God, and they could not stand Daniel because of his stand. So listen, you're going to have enemies in life. The bottom line is, what kind of enemies do you have? That's the question I want you to ask. If you say, well, some of the enemies I have are people who are trying to live for God and they don't like my lifestyle because I'm hypocritical, that's not the right type of enemies. If the enemies you have are people who have no concern for the things of God and they can't stand your lifestyle because you want to live for God, then those are the kind of enemies that you want to have. Bottom line is, you're going to have enemies. What kind of enemies do you have? So before we jump in, very quickly, there's two things I want you to remember. Number one, Daniel is now a very old man. We talked about that last week. He's up in age. This is no longer the teenage Daniel anymore. He's now somewhere around over 80 years old, and he spent all of his life, for the most part, serving these various pagan rulers. And the second thing I want you to remember, to kind of put us in the context, is that now he's serving under a new king. If you remember, at the end of chapter 5, that Belshazzar was killed and the Medo-Persians took over, and now the new king in charge is King Darius, the ruler over the Medo-Persian Empire. So the names have changed a little bit, but the spiritual challenge is still the same. So number one, I want us to see, will Daniel remain faithful when the pressure's on? Let's see, number one, the king's decree. The king's decree. Look at verse 1 of chapter 6. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion nor fault, forasmuch as he was faithful. Neither was there any error or fault found in him. Now, again, was he perfect? No, of course he was not perfect. But as these men were trying to find something, going through his trash, following him, whatever they tried to do, they were trying to find a way that he messed up, find a place he shouldn't have gone to that he went to. Find a relationship he was having behind the scenes. They couldn't find anything. They found no fault in him. Verse 5, then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors, the princes, the counselors, and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, except you, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing that it shall not be, or that it be not changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Verse 9, wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Now, as this chapter begins to open, we see Daniel, like many times before in the first 5 chapters, he's been promoted to another high position. There was something different about Daniel. Every ruler he served under now has promoted him to just about as high a position as you possibly can get outside of being king yourself. Why? Why would these wicked pagan kings promote a godly man who there was no fault found in him? Why would they do that? Well, I'm sure there were several reasons for it. Number one, you probably think they probably, number one, want to find somebody who doesn't have loose morals, somebody they can trust, and Daniel proved to be trustworthy. Who else do you want to promote other than somebody you can trust? And that's probably the main reason they decided to do it. But number two, I would say God's favor no doubt was upon him. There was something different about Daniel. And God had his hand upon Daniel that gave him that special favor that allowed him to be used in a mighty way in these various kingdoms. So evidently Darius recognized him as a man of integrity, and he wanted to make him the second in command, if you will, over the entire kingdom. And that's where the intrigue, if you will, really begins. As he's promoted, we know from history these people are called the satraps, but they're really they're officials and administrators and governors in this government. They tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel. Hey, we got to get this guy out. This guy who used to be a slave boy, who's now over 80, surely we've got to do better than he is. Why has he got the king wrapped around his finger? What's going on here? We got to get him out. If you remember, the Bible tells us that Darius set up 120 princes over the whole kingdom, and over all 120 he put 3 presidents. And the Bible tells us that Daniel was over all 3 of those. So Daniel really is, other than the king himself, is the man in charge. And so these guys think, we got to find something to get him on. We got to find some way to get him out of this office. But the Bible tells us they were unable to do so. They were unable to find any fault against him. No corruption in him. I'm sure they had somebody come and try to bribe him after work. Hey, do this. Tell me some secrets that are going on. I'm sure they tried everything they possibly could. But they could not find any corruption because he was trustworthy. He wasn't corrupt. He wasn't negligent. He was trustworthy. So finally these men said, we're not going to find anything against him. No occasion against him, the Bible says, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. They said, guys, we have exhausted all our resources and we cannot find anything wrong with him. So the only way that we're going to get this guy to slip up is if we pass a law or get the king to pass a law that what he's currently doing, living for God, is against the law. That's the only way it's going to happen. There's no way, that's the only thing he does on a regular basis is pray and spend time with his God. So his enemies discovered he was faithful in his duties. They discovered that he was faultless in his character, but they also discovered he was fervent in his prayers. Those are 3 marks of godliness that even unbelievers can see. I want you to understand this. The people who watch you, and by the way, there are people who watch you. I hope you understand that. No matter what your position is, no matter what you do for a living, or even if you're retired, there are people who watch you as so-called believers. They watch your life, and there's several things they can tell about you just by looking at you, and it's the same 3 things we talked about with Daniel. They can tell if you work hard at your job. When I was in college and I was working secular jobs to help pay my way through college, and have some spending money and do some various things, I wanted to make sure that I was one of the hardest workers there. That was not so that I could get a promotion or not so they would pat me on the back. It's because I wanted people to realize I was coming from. They knew I went to a Christian college because I put it on my application, and I wanted them to know, hey, this guy's a hard worker. There's something different about him. I mean, and it took a while, but people started to take notice. And there were managers who even told me to slow down because, listen, you got the whole day. You don't have to work this whole time. Just sit down and enjoy. And I just didn't want to do that. It was so much so, I cared so much about the reputation of Christ in my workplace that me and another friend of mine were the first two people from Southeastern that were hired at this place. But there were other people who thought, hey, it's good money and it's a pretty fun job. And it was a place that had go-karts and putt-putt and video games and arcade and laser tag. Who wouldn't want to work there? And I mean, of course, I guarantee you it's not as fun to work there as it is to go and enjoy the place, okay, mind you. But hey, I want to go there. I want to work with the go-karts. I want to do this thing. But I know how they were. And I knew they were lazy as all get out. And so these people would fill out applications and say, hey, will you put a good word in for me? And I was like, well, I can't promise anything. And the manager would call me in his office, or me and this other guy, Noah, in his office and say, what do you think about this guy? He filled out an application. He's from the same school as you. Know him? I'd be like, yeah, we know him. Don't do it. Don't hire him. You're going to regret it if you hire him. And rightfully so. These are the same people who flip-flop jobs every 2 weeks. Because I cared about the reputation of God. But people watching you are going to see if you're a hard worker at your job. That matters. Number two, they know what kind of character you have. They know what kind of character you have by watching you. They know whether they're sincere or not. They know whether you compromise or not. And number three, if they watch you long enough, they're going to see whether or not you are a man or woman of prayer. They're going to notice that. Because there's going to be things that happen at work, and people are going to look to you when things happen and say, what's their reaction going to be? And if your first response is to take everything to God in prayer, they're going to notice that. They're going to notice when you talk about it. Now, it's not something we should talk up to just have people pay attention, but people will take notice. These people, all they did was follow Daniel for a little bit of time, and they noticed that this guy's solid at his job. He's not lazy at all. He's a man of integrity. He's not going to compromise. Number two, they said, hey, this guy, he is rock solid. After work, he's not going out to the bar like everybody else. After work, he's not getting involved in, he's good. And then number three, hey, he is a man of prayer. They saw him praying those 3 times a day, as we're going to talk about here in just a minute. Bottom line is, whatever is in your heart, sooner or later is going to come out, and people will notice. People who don't know the Lord will know the truth about you. And in Daniel's case, even his enemies had to admit he had no glaring weaknesses. There was nothing for them to be able to say that they could find any wrong in him. I think it's important that we understand this. Horace Greeley said this. He said, fame is a vapor, popularity is an accident. Well, that's true, isn't it? We see that in our world today. Riches take wings. Those who cheer today may curse tomorrow. Only one thing endures, character. Character. And Daniel was a man of character. Daniel was hated because he was successful and he was godly. He was hated by his comrades, by the people that he worked with. I believe God wants to teach us that even when we do everything right, even when you are living for God the way that you're supposed to, and as far as you know there's nothing between you and God, and you still have to trust in God, doing right is no guarantee that everything's going to go right. Trusting God and living for God is no guarantee that everything in your life is going to be easy street and cake and ice cream. It just doesn't work that way. If that were the case, then Daniel would have no issues at all, right? We wouldn't even be talking about this story if that were the case, because Daniel did everything right. But yet, he still finds himself in a den of hungry lions in just a few verses. But I want you to think about something. Suppose your enemies decided to check out all your business the way these officials tried to find out Daniel's business. I'll tell you, this was a convicting thought. But I wrote some things down. Suppose that someone hired a private investigator to follow you and to look into all of your business dealings, or to look into your public and private life, past and present. You know what this reminded me of? It reminded me of back with the, regardless of your political affiliations, back with the last couple of Supreme Court nominations and the confirmation hearings that went on, when they were dragging up stuff from Kavanaugh and his high school yearbook of something he wrote in somebody's high school yearbook back when he was, 17, 18 years old. I mean, that's scary to think about, somebody digging that deeply into your past. And by the way, I think it's pretty impressive. That's all they could find on him was a few things like that. It's neither here nor there. But imagine, what would they uncover in your life? Suppose they checked out your high school and college records and talked to some of your old friends that you hung around with. What if they Check out how you treat your children. What about your phone calls, your shopping habits, your internet usage, your financial records, your favorite TV shows and movies, what you do while you're on vacation? You think nobody sees you. Every relationship you've ever had, your tax returns, every corner of your bedroom, your business deals, your police record, how you act on the job, how you deal with the opposite sex, the vocabulary you use at home. Is it different than how you talk in public? The jokes you tell, how you treat your spouse, the places you visit. Could any of us survive that kind of scrutiny? It's a convicting thought, is it not? But Daniel did. Daniel had these investigators all up in his stuff. I'm sure they went through his trash. I'm sure they did everything they possibly could to find dirt on him, and they could not. There was no obvious moral weakness. They tried as hard as they could, but his enemies found nothing wrong in his life. And so he lived, if you will, to use the phrase, he lived above reproach. He was a man of integrity. But he did have one flaw, and I say flaw with quotation marks. The one flaw that he had was that he was utterly predictable in his daily prayer life. He had a prayer life that was so consistent you could set a clock by it. He was 3 times a day praying to God with his windows open, facing towards Jerusalem, as the custom was when you weren't in your homeland to face towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day. I'm sure it was probably morning, noon, and evening, somewhere around there. I'm just speculating here, but 3 times a day. It was something that the only thing they could really put a pin to and say, if we're going to find anything fault against him, it's going to be about his devotion to his God. He's so consistent with his God. You know, thought about that. You ever heard the phrase before, if you were arrested for being, or the question, if you were arrested for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Thought about that. Another convicting thought, isn't it? If people were watching you and they knew that you were a supposed Christian, would there be enough evidence in your daily life for them to say, yep, that's a true believer? If they saw your prayer life, would it be something they would say, yep, several times a day I see them hit their knees or bow their head and spend time talking to God in prayer? Every time something happens at work, they're all the time talking about going to God in prayer. Or would they, that every morning they're reading their Bible like clockwork every morning or every night? Would they find that in your life? Would they? Something we need to think about. Daniel, they did. Daniel no doubt had this consistent prayer life. So the governors come up with this plan. They go to King Darius and they said, Darius, we want you to pass a 30-day law that for 30 days you are a god pretty much. That nobody for 30 days can pray to any other god or any other man except for you, King Darius. Well, who would not like that idea, right? What king would not like the idea to be a god for a month? And so he says, okay. He has no idea who they're targeting. He has no idea why they're doing this. He just likes the flattery, as all of us would. And so he signs the decree. By the way, he knew going into it, the decree that he signed could not be changed. That was their law. Once the king signed a decree, if the king had a change of heart, he couldn't go in and change it. It could not be changed. So he don't know what's coming, but these other governors, these other officials are loving every minute of it, aren't they? We got him. We got Daniel right where we want him. This is over. We're about to get a promotion, boys. Get ready. It's over for old Daniel. Daniel was a victim of his own integrity. He was predictably faithful to God. Think about it. If he would have been a flaky believer, like many believers are today, this evil plot would have never worked, would it? If he would have been somebody who would have compromised in his integrity, this plot would have never worked. But he wasn't. I want you to see number 2, Daniel's devotion. We see the king's decree, but notice number 2, Daniel's devotion. Look at verse 10. Now when Daniel knew, and this is important, he knew the writing was signed. It's not like he didn't know about it. You get pulled over for a speeding ticket, and do you know how fast you were going? Do you know what the speed limit was? Yeah, you just passed the speed limit sign. You know exactly what the speed limit was. And I'm talking to myself here, by the way. Right? I didn't know. I plead ignorant. Daniel knew it was against the law. Daniel knew this law had been passed, that anybody that prayed to any person or God other than King Darius for this month's time period was going to be thrown into the lion's den. He didn't care. He kept doing what he always did. When he knew the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God. And notice this last phrase, as he did aforetime. You know what that means? As he always did. He wasn't flaunting it. He wasn't doing it in spite of them. It was just something he always did. It was a non-negotiable for him. 3 times a day, with the windows open, I'm going to be praying. Verse 11, then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. They came near and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. King, have you not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast in the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Verse 13, then answered they and said before the king, that Daniel, you can imagine the pit that goes in the king's stomach, that Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. Then the king, verse 14, when he heard these words, listen to me, was sore displeased with himself. Kicking himself. I didn't think about old Daniel. And he set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men assembled unto the king and said unto the king, know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute which the king establisheth may be changed. They knew he wanted to. And you knew he wanted to. Hey, I made a mistake. Let's change that law. And they said, I want to remind you, O king, the law is you cannot change the law. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him to the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, thy God, whom thou servest continually. Now think about this. This is a pagan, heathen king. The God that you serve continually, he will deliver thee. And a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. So what do you do when you're in Daniel's shoes, when you realize that a law has been passed that really only has one person targeted? Think about that. A whole law for an entire kingdom has been passed, and there's one person they're trying to go after. Can you imagine walking around with a bullseye on your forehead? What Daniel had to feel like. It didn't stop him. He didn't change. He didn't compromise. He was going to do him. He was going to do what he had always done, just as he did aforetime, just as he had done before. For perhaps 85 years, Daniel had prayed 3 times a day. And I know, probably didn't when he was a baby. I understand that. But just work with me here. 85 years, 3 times a day. Maybe 7 o'clock in the morning, noon, and then maybe 5 or 6 o'clock at night. Each day was always the same. Wherever he was, he stopped to pray 7, noon, and 5. Like clockwork, his daily routine. 7, noon, and 5. 7, noon, and 5. If he had a business trip, guess what? It didn't matter. 7, noon, and 5. If he was on vacation for a few days, it didn't matter. He wasn't taking a vacation from God. 7, noon, and 5. You could set your watch by his prayer times. By the way, I did the math, and I know, again, this is just a figure, but if 3 times a day for 85 years would be somewhere around 93,000 prayers in his lifetime. I'm sure it's probably even more than that, because I'm sure he prayed more than 3 times a day, just not in his window, but at least 3 times a day. 93,000 prayers. So no wonder he simply went back to his room and did what he'd always done. It was a habit for him. It was something that he was not going to do without in his life. An 85-year-old habit's pretty hard to break. Some of you can attest to that, right? An 85-year-old habit is pretty hard to break. He was not going to break this habit just because some young guns had come in and threatened his life. It wasn't going to change him. After all, he was 85. He wasn't going to live forever, was he? He was prepared to die. So when they had tricked Darius into signing this law, Daniel just went ahead with his daily routine. No big deal. He went home. He knelt down with the windows open, facing toward Jerusalem, and he prayed. And he did it knowing that his adversaries would catch him. But he didn't care. He was going to do it because he was faithful to God. By the way, think about 93,000 prayers. That's a lot. But do you understand that if our church, let's just say for the next year, if every person that's a member of our church, if every person that's here this morning would decide that I'm going to pray 3 times a day for the next year, just 3 times a day for the next year, that our church collectively would pray more than Daniel did his entire life. 3 times a day. Talk about the power of prayer. I want to encourage you. You need to be people of prayer. Make it a priority. I talk about Bible reading a lot, but prayer goes right along with that. But the great thing about it is you don't have to have a Bible in front of you. You don't have to be in your prayer closet. You don't have to be in front of your window. You can do it anywhere, anytime. Bowing your head and you don't have to bow your head. I pray a lot driving down the road, and I promise you I don't have my head bowed. If you see me drive, you may think I have my head bowed, but I don't, okay? Spending time talking with God. Imagine the difference it would make if we would pray that much. What if you had to stop praying? Would it bother you? If somebody said you can no longer pray, would it even affect your life? Would your routine change at all? Would anything change in your life? If you stop praying, the world will stop bothering you. If you stop praying, the lions won't come near you. Your family will finally think you're normal again. Your boss will think you're one of the boys. The lions win when we are silent. But the great mark of true faith is that we keep praying. It's easy to think of all the excuses that Daniel could have come up with to quit praying, couldn't he? It's just for 30 days. No big deal. 30 days is not that long. I can start back after 30 days. As soon as this law runs out, I can go back to praying the way that I was. Because it's more important that as a good Christian, me to be in this position of importance. I can do a whole lot more good there than I can dead in the den of lions. What if he'd have just said, well, I'm just going to close the windows for 30 days. 30 days, I can keep praying, but just with the windows shut. What's the big deal? It didn't matter to him. He was not going to change. He didn't do it. Or he could have just said, I'll just pray in my heart. I don't have to kneel down. I don't have to bow my head and close my eyes and do this like we do with little kids. I can just pray in my heart. I'm still praying. Wasn't going to change him. It was not going to change him. Certainly, he must have known that if he didn't go along with the law, the lions would eat him. But none of those things mattered. Because long ago, Daniel had purposed in his heart. He was not going to compromise. There was no price that could be paid for him to sell out in his relationship with the Lord. One writer said this, and I don't have time to dive into it, but one writer said that Daniel's bedroom was the real lion's den. Think about that. Daniel, if you know the rest of the story, you understand that. Daniel's bedroom with the windows open really was the real lion's den, because that's where the rubber met the road. That's where the real battle was fought and won. On his knees in his bedroom with everything set against him, he was not going to compromise. So when he won there, the real lions were no problem for him, were they? And we know the fact. We think the miracle was that Daniel survived a night with the lions, and that is a miracle to be sure, don't get me wrong. But the greater miracle is that he continued to pray when his life was on the line. He didn't stop. He kept praying. So what do you do when they call for the lions? Well, you shouldn't change a thing. What do you do when they threaten to take away your religious liberties or take away any other liberties you may have in this life when it comes to the things of Christ? You don't stop. You don't give in. You don't give in to this cancel culture, no matter how popular it may be, and no matter how unpopular being a Christian may be. You don't give in. You don't give in no matter what your friends or family think about your spiritual life. You keep on keeping on for God. And you let the chips fall where they may. So Darius now knows he's been tricked. And he likes Daniel. He immediately, starts thinking of all the ways he can reverse this law. They remind him, no, king, you can't do it. And it's bothering Darius that this is having to happen now. The Bible tells us that Darius had a sleepless night when he has to call for Daniel to be thrown in. Darius, I'm sure Daniel slept like a baby, by the way, and we're going to talk about it in just a second, but Darius was struggling with this because he was a friend of his. He cared mightily for him. And I really believe that Darius thought that Daniel's God was so big and so strong that he could save him, but he didn't know until the next morning came. He had no clue what would happen. I don't doubt that there was some anxiety when they took Daniel to the pit. I'm sure he had some anxiety. I'm sure that he was praying as they flung him into the darkness and he's sliding across the dirt floor. I'm sure he's praying the entire time. I'm sure you could hear the sounds of the lion breath right on top of him, just a few feet away. But there were no roars. There was no menacing movements. There was no teeth immediately tearing into flesh. None of that stuff happened. So as the seconds ticked away and the minutes began to pass, the hours went along, the lions never touched him. They didn't eat him. By the way, the lion's den was certain death. All this was a pit dug in the ground that they had a tunnel to bring the lions in, and once they threw you in, they covered it with a big rock. So there was no escape for you. And these lions were starved for several days so that once they threw somebody in, it was certain that it was over. Nothing happened. The whole night, nothing happened. Maybe the lions became like cuddly kittens and he played with them all night. I don't know what he did, but they didn't eat him. And so we don't have all the details of what happened in that lion's den, but we do know the rest of the story, which leads us, number 3, to the Lord's deliverance. I want you to see the Lord's deliverance. Look at verse 18. Then the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. All night he didn't eat. He was worried. Neither was there instruments of music brought before him. I don't even want music to be played. I'm in such a bad mood. And his sleep went from him. Couldn't even sleep the whole night. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste into the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel and said, and the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions? You can imagine his ear up against the rock, waiting for a voice. Am I going to hear anything? Then said Daniel, verse 21, to the king, O king, live forever. My God hath sent his angel, and hath shut the lions' mouths, and they have not hurt me. For as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, I have done no hurt. Then was the king exceeding glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. Now stop right there for just a second. I like to picture Daniel, I'm sure Daniel slept like a baby. I really have to believe he did. I don't know, he might not have, but I like to picture Daniel using this fluffy lion as a pillow and a blanket right around him, right? While the king is tossing and turning, and the king don't want any music to be playing, don't bring any food. The king is worried out of his mind. Daniel is sleeping like a baby. And the whole night, these hungry lions didn't even touch Daniel. I read one commentary that said this: if Daniel would have kept staying in there, the lions would have died of starvation. Because the Bible tells us that God sent an angel to shut the mouths of the lions. So as long as Daniel was in there, no hurt was going to come upon him. And so when they brought him out, there was no harm found on him. An 85-year-old man, who knows what kind of shape he was in, but he was in no worse shape than when they put him in there, at least. Verse 24, the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel. All those men who had been on the stakeouts, who had tricked him into passing the law, they brought him, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives. And look what the Bible says. You say, well, maybe these lions weren't very hungry after all. Maybe they just had a stomach ache. But as soon as they threw them in there, the lions had the mastery of them and break all their bones in pieces, or ever they came at the bottom of the den. Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree. Remember, a decree cannot be changed. That in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and steadfast forever. And his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. And so Daniel survived the night. Darius gives praises to the one true God. What amazing words to be coming from the lips of a pagan king. Now, we don't know if he got saved or not. I don't know. There's not as much evidence as there was for me as maybe Nebuchadnezzar, but who knows until we get to heaven. But he makes the decree that Daniel's God is the one true God. So how do we close this story that everybody knows? What do we learn from this? Let me give you just a couple things very quickly in closing. Number one, I believe you need to understand, as we talked about already, it is possible to live a pure life in the midst of a thoroughly pagan world. It is possible. You say, Brother Adrian, I'm struggling. This world is so sinful. My coworkers don't have any concern for the things of God. I've got family members who don't even care for the things of God. It's so hard to do what's right. I feel like I'm spinning my wheels. Is it even possible? It's possible. Daniel's story demonstrates wholeheartedly that if you make up your mind, or Daniel chapter 1, purpose in your heart to serve God, that you can do it even in the center of a pagan government. In the middle of a wicked world, you can still live for God. Now listen, there's always going to be compromise available for those who want to compromise. And if you want to compromise, there's a million ways just today you can compromise your faith. But there is always a way to obey God for those who want to obey God. So you can live for God in the midst of a wicked world. Number two, Christians who live for God should expect opposition. You're going to have enemies. You're going to have people who want to destroy your life, but keep on keeping on. Those jealous officials are never far away. They're watching you. Remember, they're watching you. They're seeing how you react to things. They're seeing the things that you talk about at work, the places you go, the people you hang around. They're watching you. Number three, God can use us to touch unlikely people if we're faithful to Him. Darius was one of those you think, who could ever touch him for the glory of God? Well, Daniel did. Just by Daniel's testimony, by the end of the chapter, Darius is saying there is only one true God. The God of Daniel is the one true God. And everybody will worship that God because He is the one true God. Then number four, understand that God is able to deliver His people from any danger they face. Now let me take a quick time out. That does not mean that every situation is going to work out the way that Daniel's did. Daniel was saved out of the lion's den. But do you remember what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego prayed a couple of chapters ago? Or when they told the king, we believe our God can deliver us. What were the next three words they used? But if not, our God's still good and we trust Him. He's still in control. They understood that it may not always work out the way that they thought it would or they would hope it would. And we would do well if we learned the same thing. Yes, sometimes God can deliver us just like He did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And just like He did with Daniel here in chapter 6, out of the mouth of hungry lions, He can save us out of our difficulties. But sometimes it doesn't work out that way. But let me tell you this, He still will rescue us. It may not be the way that we think it should be, but He'll always be there. Sometimes we see people who are have a bad health diagnosis and not in a great spot at all. We say, well, God, heal this person. And I always pray for healing, no doubt about it. But if the person's a believer and they pass away from their disease or whatever ailment they have, and guess what? God still rescued them, hadn't He? They're in no more pain anymore. Well, brother, that's just not what it's not what I want. You're right, it may not be what we want. It's not about us. But God still rescues us. He still is there for us. From any danger we face, God always delivers in His own time and in His own way. So number one, if you're here today and you don't know Jesus Christ, if you don't know the God of Daniel, then let me encourage you and encourage you to understand that the same God who rescued Daniel from that lion's den will rescue you from your sin if you'll turn to Him. If you will confess your sin and place your faith and trust in Jesus Christ and what He did for you by dying on the cross for you, taking your place, if you'll do that, He'll rescue you just like He did Daniel. And the same God that Daniel served, the same God that Darius said is God over all, can be your God if you'll trust in Him today and don't put it off. Here's the second thing I want you to understand. I know the vast majority of people in this room today are believers, but understand me with something this morning. When it comes to your prayer life, for Daniel, prayer was more important than his very life. What you think about that? He knew it was going to cost him his life to pray, and yet he still prayed. How's your prayer life? How is your spiritual life? Would there be enough evidence to convict you of being a Christian? If people followed you every day for a week, every minute of every day, would they find anything to think otherwise? Or would there be so much evidence they say, oh, that person is a true, genuine believer. They're the real deal. I hope so. Let it be a convicting thought for us. Let it be a challenge to us to make sure that our lives are consistent. That we are men and women of integrity in the middle of a wicked world. That our relationship with God is a non-negotiable. No matter what pressures may come, we're going to be consistent. And we're going to be all in for the things of God. Every head bowed, every eye.